All right, Section 12, Governors. Your PGR governor, description, operation, maintenance, governor removal, governor installation, governor compensation, engine speed control, engine shutdown, air pressure sensor assembly, fuel limiter setting, B balancer, rocker arm, stop screw, load regulator, pilot valve, associated linkage, overriding solenoid, low oil pressure, shutdown oil filter, flushing governor, governor oil supply, governor storage, governor drive assembly, surface data setting, adjustment, table specification, equipment and material specifications. Your engine maintenance manual, Governor, Section 12, electric motive, GM 645 cubic inch engine. Limiting rebalance of the type PGR Governor is used for the turbocharged engine. The electro-hydrostatic speed control maintains the engine speed selected for the engine operator. The Governor provided with the sensor assembly sensitive to the absolute air pressure, which operates adjusting the engine to the loaded portion of the air supply with the range of the load regulator to ensure the correct airflow ratio. In addition, with the rocker arm lever arrangement, is provided with on the governor to stop upward movement on off of the power piston through the action of the fuel limiter. The governor incorporates the engine protective devices in Figure 12.2, which shuts down the engine down, actuated low engine oil pressure, high oil temperature, resolve of the operation, low water crankcase, pressure detector, visual indication alarm in the actuated event, and if an engine protection shutdown, a normal engine shutdown is obtained by actuating speed solenoid with the top with the stop button. Other auxiliary devices which are part of the governor include load regulator, pilot valve, which other control oils, load regulator, ORS, or over your ORS solenoid, which is energized, raises the load regulator pilot valve to minimum field position. This shows your electric hydraulic governor. A governor schematic diagram. The main parts of the speed and fuel control portion of the governor are the speed sensing arrangement, speed sensor flyweights, fuel adjusting control, power position, compensating mechanism, compensating land, integral of the power piston, pilot valve of the buffer piston, springs, and independent oil system, oil sump, oil pump, accumulators, external filter, connection passages. The governor houses a self-contained hydraulic oil system consisting of the storage sump of the rotary gear pump, the accumulator to oil lubricate for the moving parts of the provided forces necessary to operate the various parts of the governor. To vary the speed of the engine of the throttle chamber to maintain constant engine speed with the load chamber, the amount of the fuel injected into the cylinder must be variable determined by the position of the power piston, the move of the power piston. Tension speed spring is varied with the throttle. The change of the engine speed is due to the load of the chain of the flyweights will remove the change of the power piston of the pilot valve plunger control of the supply of the oil power to the power piston. The power piston move the injector control rack through the governor of the rotary shaft with the injector linkage upward motion to the power piston result of the under pressure control power piston pilot with the valve plunger rising the piston against the pressure of the power piston spring. The compensating mechanism prevents the engine from racing, hunting, and arresting in the movement of the power piston after travel to the amount sufficient to give the desired speed. Compensating mechanisms include the integral receiving the compensating piston, buffer spring pistons, and compensating needle valve. The governor drive shaft pumps, gears, rotating bushing, flyweights rotate together. Two accumulators provide the storage of the governor oil under pressure. The maximum pressure for the governor oil is regulated by the bypass of one of the accumulators. A buffer piston centered in the springs is located between the pilot valve plunger and power piston. The power piston is in bypass, but the needle valve that also by bypassage is uncovered, which move the center distance away from the central position. The small difference of the oil pressure of the two sides of the buffer piston is transmitted to receive the compensation piston and the pilot valve plunger. Operation 12.3 illustrates the operation fuel control of the portion of the governor power piston spring acts as fuel shut off the fuel of the engine. The oil under the pressure is usually only to raise the power piston increase the supply of the fuel to the engine. Following paragraphs describe the sequence of events, different operation conditions. Alright, your load decrease and throttle decrease. Figure 12.3, the engine is running normally under steady load with the air and constant speed. The flyweights, pilot valve, plunger, buffering system, buffering piston in normal position with the control lane with the pilot valve, plunger, regulating the portholes of the rotating bushing. The power piston is stationary. Assuming the engine load is decreased, they increase the speed increase with the flyweights move out with raising the control lane over the pilot valve, plunger, uncovering the regulating ports of the rotating bushing, uncovering the regulating ports of the direction permits the oil to escape the area of the right of the buffer piston and the move to the right of the spring force, pressure force the power piston down in apparent with a sense of the compressed the right hand buffer spring, oil pressure on the left hand buffer piston is slightly higher than the other than on one on the right. The pressures are connected at areas above and below the receiving compensation piston of the pilot valve. Alright, so it shows your fuel control schematic diagram, the shutdown rod, fuel limit light, lockdown, and then your accumulators, pilot valve, plunger, gear pump, drive shaft, oil sump, buffering spring, terminal shaft scale, compensating the U-valve, buffer piston, power piston, increase, decrease, terminal shaft scale. Alright, your plunger since the high pressure is above the force downward below the end of the pilot valve, the plunger starts to close the ports of the top of the power of the piston movement. The governor is probably adjusted the action of the top of the movement of the power piston, which is moved far enough to correct the load of the chain with the started action. Oil leaking with the compensating needle valve allows the buffer piston to return to the center, which gradually releases the force over the top of the receiving compensating piston. The force is no longer needed to hold the pilot valve plunger in central position because during the time of the engine speed has been returned to the normal. The outward force of the ply weights have been reduced until the balance of either speed or springs. It is apparent with the compensating mechanism described above the procedure for the stable operation by permitting the governor to rapidly respond to the speed of the chain, but this will wait for the speed to return to normal. Load increase with the throttle increase. As before, all parts of the governor are centered, but there is no power piston movement, but assume that the engine load is increased, resulting in the decrease of the speed. The governor will go through the cycle operations as follows. The decrease in speed will cause the flyweights to move inward, which lowers the pilot valve plunger, opens the ports, oil from the accumulators pass through the pilot valve with the force of the buffer piston to the left, move the power piston upward to give the engine more fuel. The compression of the left-hand buffer spring is a result of the higher pressure of the right-hand side of the buffer plunger. On the underside of the receiving compensation piston, the pressure moves the pilot valve plunger upward and stops the movement of the power piston when it moves far enough to correct the load for the change in started action. Oil leaking through the compensating needle valve gradually releases the forces under the receiving of the compensation piston, with allowing the buffer piston to return to the engine center. The force is no longer needed to hold the pilot valve plunger in central position during this time that the engine speed has returning to normal. And preceding description of operation speed and change as the result of the load change have been considered. Similar to governor movements occur with the difference between the actual governor speed and the governor speed setting produced for the changing speed spring with the tension with the speeding adjusting control used in the governor. Large speed change with the buffer piston travel is much greater to the left or the right depending on the increase of the decrease of the speed, the opening and the passage of the flow of the oil from the piston, power piston. Under normal operation, the air pressure sensor of this assembly rebalancing arrangement automatically adjusts itself to provide the correct operation. However, the airbox pressure of the Foley's demand is not normal during operation. Rebalancing the fuel limit arrangement, expanding the fuel passage. Explaining the following pages will automatically make an adjustment to compensate for this condition. Maintenance, governor removal. Remove the governor of the engine as follows. Open the drain cock on the side of the governor, drain oil in suitable container, remove the right and left bank of the control rod from the governor with the control rod lever. Disconnect the electrical connector and all external lines and hoses. Remove the four stud nuts for the securing governor with the mounting surface of the lift with the governor off the studs. Remove the gasket between the governor of the mounting surface. Caution, use care with the handling of the governor. Avoid striking the end of the drive shaft or the terminal shaft. The damage can be done to the shaft of the bearings and governor's oil pump gears. 5. Remove the governor to control rod from the governor terminal shaft. Your governor installation. Install the governor on the engine as follows. Apply the governor control rod into the governor terminal shaft. Caution, ensure the unsplined area with the lever inside diameter properly aligned with the keyway. Missing spline on the terminal shaft. Install the gasket mounting surface of 3. Install the governor on the mounting surface with the terminal shaft of the pointing tower of the engine. Apply the 4 stud nuts for the torque specified with the value. Collect the electrical connector, all external lines and hoses. 6. Connect the right and left bank of the control rods to the governor control rod lever. And every time the governor is installed with the engine and the injector rack setting, should be checked with the manufacturing tolerance for the governor mounting to bolts and the position of the governor in relation with the injector linkage of the check for the rack setting. Your governor compensation description. The compensating mechanism prevented the engine from racing with the hunting or the resting of the movement of the power piston after it has traveled a sufficient amount with the given the desired speed. The compensating mechanism include the integral compensation receiving the piston, buffer, piston springs, and the compensation needle valve. When the engine is started for the first time and after installation, the new reconditioned governor or one that has been drained or cleaned with the new oil added, the governor will require a compensation adjustment. This is necessary for the purge of the governor oil system to trap air. Maintenance, the compensation adjustment. See the governor oil with the proper level of the cycle left to operate with the governor at idle speed. Open the compensating needle valve to 12-1 with the several turns. Loosen the vent plug with figure 12-1 several turns. Do not remove the plug. The governor will hunt and surge and air will bleed from the system of the vent plug, which when only oil flows from the vent plug, the system is Free of air with the compensating needle valve should be closed slowly with a hunting condition with the stop and lessen all of the governor running it until the normal operation temperature is reached. Time in the vent and plug to prevent the oil leakage. Add oil necessary to retain the proper level of the governor. After normal temperature has been reached again with the open the compensating needle valve allow the governor to hunt. Those needle valves until the hunt stops. The needle valve will be open approximately 1/4 of the 3 turns depending on the engine characteristics. Test governor stability on manually charging the speed. Observe the governor recovery if the governor returns with its steady speed with a compensating adjustment and with a satisfactory with the hunting of the resumed closely compensating the needle valve slightly with the testing again. Keep the compensating needle valve as open as far as possible to prevent sluggish still with maintaining the governor operation after the compensating is made. You should not require another adjustment unless the permanent temperature change affects the viscosity of the governor oil. Your engine speed control description. Speed setting with the electro-hydraulic governor is accomplished by stepping the energized differential combinations of A, B, C, D solenoids. The solenoid A, B, and C plunger bearings, the triangular fulcrum plate varying distance from the set fulcrum point. The triangular plate fulcrum bears on a lever which is connected with the speed control pilot valve. Inside the rotating bushing, the D solenoid plunger bears the rotating bushing through the cap of the bearing. To increase the speed spring must be compressed. The compressor lessened. To decrease the speed settings piston position must be changed to satisfy these conditions. Accomplished by admitting the release governor oil above the speed setting piston. The adjusting of the release of the oil from the speed setting piston is controlled by the row solenoids from the slip speed pilot valve rotating bushing. When the solenoid different combinations of A, B, and C are energized, the triangular shows your triangular fulcrum, the speed control pilot, speed control pilot valve, and then rotating bushing, regulating port, intermittent oil supply port to some sport. Fuel limit nut, shutdown, bushing, speed piston, speed setting, speed screw, flyweights, ball head gear, pilot valve plungers, and pump for oil pump driver, terminal shaft scale, power piston, compensating control lane, regulating port, Your fulcrum is forced down with the distance depending on the solenoid energy of this cover. The speed control of the pilot valve go down. The regulating port of the rotating bushing is uncovered. The permitting of the governor oil with the under pressure force the speed with the speed setting position. Piston down with the compressing the speed spring with the speed setting with the piston move downward. Linkage rate with the speed with the pilot valve to again closing the regulating port, which is desired piston with the power piston position has been reached. The compression of the speed spring forces flywheel, allowing the governor pilot valve plunger lowered and permanent oil raised the power piston. Increase the fuel of the engine, unbalanced oil pressure for the compensating land of the pilot valve plunger closed with the regulating port of the power piston has been raised enough to for the desired feed of the new engine speed of the reach. The flyweights will return to the power balanced position against the speed spring pressure. The solenoid combination ABC, solenoid de-energize the triangular fulcrum plate will arrive. The speed control pilot valve will also assume the move upward. The pilot valve with the raised oil with above the speed settings piston drains the regulating port of the oil sump of the speed setting of the piston raised and then spring when the piston moves up. The contracting linkage causes the speed control pilot valve to move down with closing the regulating port with the desired piston position reach. Since the speed setting of the piston was raised, speed of the speed compression is lessened. Flyweights will move outward with the central figure force to lift the pilot valve plunger. Oil will be released under the power piston and will move downward to decrease the fuel supply with the engine speed. Energize the D solenoid with the combination of other solenoids lesser than effect of the engine speed with the D solenoid pushing for the rotating bushing lower for the regulating port. When only the D solenoid energize the opens of the regulating port, rotating the bushing of the sump of the providing oil above the speed setting piston to be reached. Piston then raises the piston extends of the shutdown bushing, causing the governor to shut off the engine fuel supply. No, the oil enters the speed control rotating bushing through the intermittent supply port with the ports of such size that allow the speed setting piston to move at full stroke with a specified time. The consequently speed increase the control under all conditions of the operation. Time speed decreases control by a slot in the lower land. Maintenance and recommendation: the suitable test should be used for the making the engine speed settings. Note: the test speed stands must have the provision to energize A and D solenoid simultaneously for setting low idle speed. When engine speed with the governor solenoids are adjusted for the provided specified speed of the idle, intermediate, and full speed throttles. Position application speed for the H for the throttle setting refer to table A with the script at the end of this section. In addition, information on the governor nameplate with each of the name has an insert with the figure 12.5 with the full speed with the engine with a full in-load injector rack or balance partial from the engine. The speed given the insert of the governor resides to the differential full load injector rack, and the engine speed the new insert shall be applied having the correct information. Every time the governor is installed with the engine of the injector rack, length and settings should be checked before attempting the hot set speed of the governor should be operated with the head heat tested stand oil at 180 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit with sufficient length of time to allow the temperature to equalize. To facilitate setting speed, the solenoid adjustment wrench must be used with the tool provided by the means of for holding a solenoid case with a wheel while making lock nut and slap screw adjustments. Establish the absolute air pressure to bellow of the air is given in the table to B, but adjust the solenoid to obtain the speed given in the table A, but described below. Place the throttle in number 6 position and bring the specify the RPM adjusting fulcrum nut with the figure 12.6 for the end of the linkage racing the fulcrum nut increase speed. So it shows the solenoids for A, B, C, and D in your speed scale. Alright, move the throttle number 8, position set speed with adjusting D solenoid C, set speed with adjusting the D solenoid stop screw with the top stop screw increase speed. With throttle number 4, position adjust the B solenoid stop screw, the set speed with the turn the stop screw, and then the increase speed. Place the throttle low idle position speed setting with adjusting C solenoid stop screw with the turning stop screw, and then increase speed. When the throttle idle position, adjusting the A solenoid to speed set with the turning screw and increase the speed. Check with the above setting, readjust the proper speeds if required. Check the engine speed at all throttle positions. All speed must be within limits of the shown in table A. The adjuster speed and servo scale as follows. When the governor operating at low idle speed with the Lowson scale, the locking screws locating in the scale with the so-stamped idle markings line with the point of the tighten the lock screw with the governor idle speed scribed line on the scale opposite pointer. With the governor at throttle 8 position scribed limited on the scale opposite pointer. Or your engine shutdown. Engine shutdown can be normally accomplished with pressing the stop button and placing the throttle in the stop position. Either action will de-energize the D solenoid. The action depresses the speed of the controlling rotating bushing. The port is below the land of the speed control pilot valve that allows the trap to roll above the governor speed spring piston. The drain the spring under the piston forces speed spring over the piston under upward extension contact shutdowns the bushings on the shutdown rod. Raising the shutdown rod also lifts the power piston pilot valve. Oil that will be released from the upper power piston, causing the power piston through the associated linkage to bring the injector to the no fuel position. Your maintenance solenoid adjustment. To adjust the required governor with the solenoid, the D solenoid will cause the engine shutdown, adjusting time, speed, and adjustment. Shutdown adjustment. Shutdown adjustment must be made with the governor's test stands if the adjustment establishes basis for fuel settings. Operate the governor 1. Operate the governor at low speed. 2. Loosen the shutdown blocking bushing lock nut. Figure 12.7. Adjusting shutdown bushing, turning the fuel limit nut until there is a 1/32 of an inch clearance between the bottom of the shutdown bushing. Speed setting part 1 fulcrum assembly. Tighten the bushing lockdown. Figure 12.7 shows the shutdown and adjusting location, shutdown rod, bushing lock, fuel limit and nut, and the shutdown bushing, and the gap at the low idle. Alright, turn the stand selector switch to opposition, loosening speed setting piston on the stop screw lock nut. Adjust the speed setting piston on the stop screw, figure 12.8 with the position speed indicator pointer at the slightly above the stop mark on the speed. Tighten the stop screws and lock nut. Figure 12.8 shows the speed setting stop screws, shows the fuel limiting cam locking screw, your speed setting stop screw, and your eccentric lock screw and eccentric. Alright, your air pressure assembly. The purpose of the sensor assembly channel 9 is the adjust of the fuel limiter pilot valve, the rebalancer arrangement in accordance with the absolute air pressure of the atomic position of the two control, but depending upon the engine airbox pressure and atmosphere pressure sensor, and the force of the balance of the driver, the consistency of the air inlet. Check valve with the orifice pack, restriction piston can assembly with the distortion spring and a bleed valve, absolute pressure below bellows arrangement, and hydraulic amplifier. Let me see if there's anything on the bottom of this page. Okay, the pressure oil enters the sensor through the inlet check valve direct to the upper side of the sensor piston through the orifice pack. Restriction to the inner side of the sensor piston. The inlet check valve prevents the siphoning of the oil with the limiter housing during shutdown period. The bleed valve regulates the rate of the oil flow for the oil area under sensor position. piston sump is function of the manifold air pressure, the bleed valve of the bypressure grade or flow oil within the air emitted with the orifice pack. The sensor piston of the move downward, conversely reducing the bypass oil flow less than emitted cause of the sensor piston and ride of the inflow outflow of the area are equal. The piston remains stationary. All right, this shows your air pressure schematic. Shows the governor pilot valve plunger. Your fuel limiting nut, load spring, shutdown bushing, shutdown rod, feedback, sump piston, pump valve, plunger, hydraulic amplifier, anti-siphoning, check valve, packing, adjusting bleed nut, evaluated sumps, air pressure sensing output, adjusting eccentric screws, and floats and fuel limiting. Or the sensing element consists of the two opposed flexible metallic bellows. The upper bellows evacuated lower bellows of the sensor of the airbox pressure. The spacer joint is the bellow at the center, while the outer end of each bellow is restrained by the movement. Air box pressure is internally sensing below the produced the flow forces causing the spacer to move towards evacuated bellows. The evacuated bellows provides an absolute reference for the air force sensing bellow force directly proportional to the absolute air box pressure. Movement of the bellows spacer is transmitted through an outer strap of the bleed valve into the bleed valve diaphragm. Your governor speed setting is advanced with the governor power piston upward, supplying additional fuel with since the airbox pressure lags engine acceleration. Fuel limiter can bell crank initially remain stationary until the airbox pressure rises. After the governor power piston upward, increase the fuel with the fuel limiting the floating lever to depress the right end of the feeder back lever of the hydraulic amplifier. The bushing of the amplifier pilot valve plunger below the center, allowing the pressure oil to flow into the air around the amplifier, causing the piston to rise. As the piston rises, it lifts the fuel limit lever of the fuel limit lever with contact with the fuel limited nut and the shutdown bushing, and it becomes lifting the shutdown rod to recenter the governor of the valve plunger of the upward movements of the fuel limits. Limit the fuel upward movements of the fuel limited feedback lever to continue, and then left end of the feedback lever to raise the far enough the recenter. Amplifier pilot valve plunger stop the flow of the oil to the amplifier position. At this point, the fuel limiting recenter of the governing pilot valve is stopping the upward movement of the governing power piston. Although the governing flyweights are under speed conditioning at the time, power piston remains stationary until the airbox pressure rises. At engine speed load, increase the airbox pressure begins to rise after a short lifetime leg, and the increase the airbox pressure produces increase the sensing bellow force. The bellow force covers the bleed valve of the diaphragm the further off its seat. This allows the greater flow of the oil to some for the admit the orifice pack. Governor oil pressure acting upper side with the sensor forcing of the piston with the downward of the force. Further compressive of the restoring spring with the piston continue with the downward movement until the increase of this restoring spring with the force is equal to the bellow force. The restores the bellow with the bleed valve of the diaphragm in the original position. At this point, the outflow of the oil is again equal to the inflow of the movement of the piston is halted. As the sensor piston can be moved downward in response to the rise in the airbox pressure of the bell crank rotating in the clockwise direction, the alloy allows the floating level of the pilot valve of the point of the left end of the lever and in turn with the hydraulic amplifier pilot valve of the plunger to rise. When the pilot valve plunger rises above the center of the oil and the amplifier piston bleeds to the sump through a drilled passage in the center of the plunger, the passenger and the plunger restrict the rate of the oil flow through the sump with the decrease of the rate of the movement of the amplifier piston, minimize the hunting of the amplifier piston, moves downward the left end of the fuel limit of the lever moves downward. This lowers the shutdown rod of the turn, lowers the governor pilot valve of the plunger, increase the engine fuel. Sequence events described above the curve of the continuous rapid sequence. Now, normal governor operation overridden during the acceleration transit. Engine fuel is scheduled in a function airbox pressure regardless of the governing speed setting. During the steady state operation, airbox pressure is normally greater than that at which the fuel limit occurs, and the sensor's piston and cam will be positioned below the effective limiting point. Alright, your maintenance. Operate the governor at idle speed. Connect the airline to the air pressure limiting fitting on the governor. Adjust the air pressure to 36 Hog ABS's HG ABS. This test stands equipped with the absolute pressure manometer reading inches of the mercury absolutely directly with a manometer. Test stands equipped with a mercury column, a barometer. Subtract the barometric pressure from the absolute pressure given them the instruction to establish the pressure difference of the inch of the mercury of the column. Loosen the eccentric locking screw with the figure 12/8 with the tourniquet eccentric clockwise until the sensor piston travels with the top of its stroke. Measure and record the height of the fuel limiter with the cam, the figure 1210 over the convenient reference of the service. Alright, figure 1210 shows fuel limiting adjusting, fuel adjusting screw, fuel limited cam, bell crank, fuel floating lever, fuel limiting fuel locking nut, fuel limiting lever. Tighten the centric locking screws slightly with the turn the centric counterclockwise until the fuel limited cam with the travel downward to 3/32 of an inch to plus or minus 1/64 of an inch. Tighten the lock screw. Rapidly increase the air block pressure with the valve. This is maybe done with the application of the vent valve between the mercury with the column of the governor air connection. Observe the limiter with the cam motion. This should follow with the pressure change with the closely with the limiter cam does not accept. Oh, the decreasing air pressure. Check with the limiter and limiter hot oil supply filter the orifice stack with the plugging. Adjust the air pressure to 36 HEB ABS. Is check for the fuel limiting cam position. Obtain in step 5. Your fuel limiter. The description. The purpose of the fuel limiter is to prevent supplying with the fuel of the engine axis, which can be properly consumed with the available air supply with the respond with the demand fuel with the governor pilot valve with the lowered to permit the governor oil to raise the power piston. The power piston of the being raised while the lift of the fuel limiting lever floating lever. If the sufficient air is not available, the proper consumption of the hydraulic amplifier piston with the contact with the fuel limit lever with the raise the shutdown piston with the governor power piston pilot valve, the governor oil port to the power piston then can be closed. The upward increased fuel movement of the power piston will be stopped. Since the limiting floater level has a movable fulcrum, the fulcrum position is automatically varied with the correct corresponding airbox pressure. This will adjust the limiter for the action proportion available to the airbox pressure. Alright, maintenance. For the governor operating at full speed, established with the absolute pressure for the sensor for the assembly with the bellows specified in table C1 and the service data and of the section, adjust the test and stand the air valve linkage to the position of the power piston of the rack length specified in table C1. Loosen the back off of the fuel limiting lock nut with the fuel limiting nut on the top of the shutdown bushing threads. Adjust the fuel limiting adjusting screw until the fuel limiting lever is in a horizontal position determined visually. Adjust fuel limiting nut until the adjusting contacts of the fuel limiting limit lever. Tighten fuel limiting locking nut. Back off of the fuel limiting adjusting screw until the fuel lever loses contact with the fuel limiting nut, and adjusting the fuel limiting adjusting screw until the fuel lever contacts the limiting nut. Limiter reduces the speed to 10 to 15 RPMs. Slowly adjust the test and air valve linkage to reduce the governor speed by 100 RPMs. Observe the terminal shaft scale with the rack length must be a specific value of the table C1 plus 1,000 to negative 2,000 an inch. If the rack length is not within specified clearance, then inspect the fuel limiter amplifier piston for leakage. Reduce absolute pressure to 42 HGs. Adjust the testing air valve linkage until fuel governor speed is obtained. Very slowly adjust the test and air valve linkage to decrease the rack length until 10-15 RPM speeds of reduction occurs. The injector rack length must be specified in table C2. Alright, the rack is not specified. Loosen over the limit of the cam locking screw with the figure 12/8. Slightly tilt the top of the cam forward to the bell crank. Increase the rack length away from the bell crank. Degree of the rack length. Tighten the locking screw. Repeat steps 12 and 13. Repeat steps 1 through 14 until all conditions of the table C1 and C2 are met. Alright, you're setting rebalancer rocker arm stop screw. The rebalancer rocker arm figure 12/11 shows the adjusting load of the air available to combustion. Setting of the rebalancer rocker arm stop screw determines the balance to injector position at the minimum airbox pressure required with a full load airbox pressure below that requires a full load of the rebalancer rocker arm position of the pilot valve with the limit load in proportion to the available air pressure. 12/11 show the rebalancing of the stopping screw, adjusting with the feeler gauge, rebalancing rocker arm block stop screw. Alright, maintenance. Recommended with the governor replacement a suitable test stand with the perform following. Maintenance: loosen the lock nut, screw down the rebalancer rocker arm stop screw, figure 12/11, and ensure with no interference during the load of the governor on the test stand. However, the governor injector rack length, engine speed, pressure is shown on the table to B3 with using the 1,000, 2,000 of an inch feeler gauge under the rebalancer rocker and block in figure 12/11. Run screw until the drag is felt with the gauge with this pull with the under the block with the tighten lock nut forward. Check with the above setting with the reducing absolute pressure for the sensor assembly below 5 inches to 6 inches HG. Establishing the pressure of the shown on B as table B as in a step. 2. Again, use the 1,000, 2,000 inch feeler gauge under the rebalancing rocker arm block. Check to see that same drag is felt on the gauge in step 3. Load the regulator pilot valve and associated linkage. Description: load regulator pilot valve figure 12/12 with this device for the governor and control of the oil, the vane motor with the load regulator addition with the load with the control of the MAVE with the dependent with the absolute air pressure. Since the rebalancer with the vary position of the load control pilot valve with the response to variation engine airbox and barometric pressure. Pilot valve linkage is figure 12/12 consists of the rebalancer rocker arm horizontal floating link slotted link eccentric clevises and later being threaded on the pilot valve plunger. Pilot valve in the connection with the load regulator requires the engine to assume the predetermined load with the engine throttle position control with the loading of the main generator from the battery field. The action of the rebalancing linkage is such that the lower set of the predetermined load value is established for the airbox pressure falls below the minimum that is established full load operation. Figure 1212 shows the partial governor section through the pilot valve associated parts with the engine outward correction with a certain throttle position lands of the pilot valve plunger closing ports B and C in the pilot valve bushing plunger position. No oil can flow from the ports from the loaded regulator vane motor. The position is balanced position of the pilot valve is shown with lubricating oil under the pressure into the valve and the end at the points between the lands of the plunger trapped in the pilot valve is balanced. When the horsepower demand of the engine is greater or less than the engine is adjusted, the developed engine given, and it shows your trapped oil and pressure oil, and this is your load regulator pilot valve schematic diagram. Okay. Alright, throttle position chain with made with the position of the governor power piston meet the chain of the horsepower demands since the throttle position has not been chained to the pilot valve plunger may be either raised or lowered through the movement of the power piston linkage. The action unbalanced with the pilot valve of the oil, the chamber permitted the flow of the cause of the load regulator adjust the generator load desired engine output. If more than the proper load is placed on the engine, the piston will move upward and increase the fuel with the action. Raise the pilot valve with the plunger figure 1212 opening the port B with the upper land oil under the pressure can be then flow from port B to the vane motor of the load regulator causing load regulator movement. Reduce the main generator output. The vane rotates pushes the oil ahead through the oil line port C of the pilot valve then to the engine oil sump. As the load of the engine is reduced, the power piston pilot valve plunger move down from the normal position. The pilot valve plunger again closes both ports B and C. The operation pilot valve lessens the proper load of the engine opposite of the given overload. Again, adjusting generator load to the permit the engine to assume the proper load of a certain throttle position. The rate of movement of the vane brush holder load regulator automatically controlled by the orifice slot under the port C of the lower port of the pilot valve bushing. As an oil load regulator must return to the port C, but the oil load regulator leaves the port B. When the oil regulates passes the port C, the slot orifice in the pilot valve bushing lower port is designed to provide for definite rate of load regulator movement. The normal action load regulator pilot valve was previously described and nullified with the overridden with the energized by the override solenoid. The action rate of the pilot valve was above the normal range of the travel determined by the mechanical linkage causing the load regulator to move toward a minimum field position. When the solenoid is de-energized, the pilot valve and load regulator position is again determined by the mechanical linkage. See overriding solenoid. Maintenance is recommended that the governor be placed on a suitable test to perform following maintenance. Setting the pilot valve linkage preparation. Before setting the pilot valve speeds, the air pressure sensor assembly of the rebalancing rocker arm stop screw must be correctly set, previously outlined. Ensure the terminal shaft scales can travel from 1.96 inch to 62 hundredths of an inch to loosen the rack stop screw, lock nut adjusting rack stop screw until the full range of the travel is attained. Your setting procedure: operate the governor of the test stand at a full load rack length, engine speed, pressure on sensor assembly 1 to 2 HGs above the shown table to be served at the end of this section. Pointer of the test stand with the servo indicator should be balanced at some point well away from either the end of the travel to setting with a given in step 1. It is not loosened with the eccentric clevis locking screw figure 1213 using a screwdriver adjusting the eccentric to bring the pilot valve to the balancing position. The tighten the clevis lock screw with the pointer on the pilot valve scale should be at 0 pilot valve balance. If necessary, relocate the scale to the position at the pointer at 0. However, the governor test stand to simulate the ideal engine speed with the terminal shaft pointer of the pressure of the on the sensor assembly are shown in table B. Alright, for your pilot valve scale, pointer should be at a maximum field start position. If the pointer is below the maximum field start position, remove the setting link from the figure 1213. Turn the floating link adjuster screw length of the dimension A. Above the dimension A should be the shortened and one correction. On this correction, adjusting the dimension A 1/2 required to return the condition step 0 balance outline steps under 1. Show 1213 show the pilot valve linkage, shows your overriding cylinder, eccentric adjustment, clevis lock screw, setting pin lock, floating pin lock, adjusting level linking, adjusting screw, rebalancing rocker arm. Recheck the setting to confirm the condition given in steps 1, 3, 2, and 3, and 4. Obtain the correct adjusting full speed condition for the idle speed condition. To readjust the linkage of the outline with the correct position obtained. Install the new setting lock pan on the pilot valve with the proper sleeve. They should not be chained with the correct engine output until the other conditions are investigated. Overriding solenoid. The description of the overriding solenoid. Figure 1212 is employed with the governor to override the normal action of the pilot valve linkage. Move the load regulator with the direction of the minimum field. The solenoid is energized with external circuits, which may be determined by the consulting of the specific wire diagram covering the particular governor application. Overriding solenoid is energized, which moves a small cylindrical valve downward and permitting the governor accumulator oil pressure to flow under the overriding cylinder piston. This piston moves the carrying load regulator pilot valve plunger with it, and the solenoid is de-energized. The spring moves the pilot valve back to the normal position. Alright, maintenance, your solenoid adjustment. The governing operator of the idle speed, loosen the lock nut, overriding solenoid, run under the screw down under the load control. Pilot valve moves up. Carefully back off the screw until the pilot valve starts down the back off the screw, then full quarter of the turn back and lock it. Improper adjusting of the overriding solenoid may result in the loss of the governor accumulator oil pressure that caused the overriding solenoid adjusting screw being backed off too far, allowing the valve to open the slow apply port, permitting the governor to oil pressure to be bypassed directly by the governor oil sump. In some cases, the engine dies the lower throttle position to readjust the overriding solenoid should be one of the checks made. Your low oil pressure shutdown. Description of the oil pressure shutdown device, figures 12-14. Integral part of the governor device will respond with the shutting of the engine down when the low oil condition is created that is caused by any of the following. Our true system low oil pressure, positive crank pressure, low water supply through the low water crankcase pressure detector will relieve the pressure from the oil pressure line to the governor. Overheated lube oil, which will also relieve the oil pressure for the line governor from the hot oil detector. A timely delay, approximately 50 to 60 seconds of idle engine speed, provided with the alarm switch of the trip. The engine shuts down when this allows the operating pressure to reach for the after starting engine. Provide time and locate the trouble spot event with a malfunction. Repeated engine starting to relocate the shutdown should not be attempted. Time delays void at about the third throttle. The shutdown will occur with approximately 2 seconds. Since oil pressure is lowest our rear of the engine oil line runs from this point with the shutdown device of the governor. Shutdown device of the governor, figure 12-14, consists of oil failure, diaphragm plunger time, delay, accumulator failure, position, ball valve, shutdown, ride, alarm switch. Your engine pressure oil is emitted to the left of the oil with the failure diaphragm. The spring is also observed the pressure left side of the diaphragm pressure oil from the governor speed setting with the piston pushing against the right side of the oil failure diaphragm. The pressure of the oil from the speed setting piston verifies the engine speed. The higher pressure of the full engine speed with the lowest of the idle engine speed. If the engine oil pressure produced below the safe level, the speed setting piston oil pressure will become greater than the engine oil pressure. Move the oil failure diaphragm plunger to the left. The permits the governor oil pressure to move the shutdown plunger to the right, releasing the trapped oil above the speed setting piston, allowing piston travel to be upward when the piston extension contacts lift the shutdown bushing on the governor pilot valve. Shutdown result in movement of the other governor components place of the terminal shaft of injector control lever. Injector rods in the no fuel position and the engine will shut down. Alright, when the shutdown plunger moves out, then the alarm switch is actuated. The color band is visible on the plunger, indicating the device has been tripped. After being tripped, the plunger must be manually reset for the permit of the governor control engine operation. If the conditions warrant, the engine being shut down and action will occur even with who the plunger would be held manually. When the oil failure piston moves to the right with the contact valve piston of the unseat of the ball valve, releasing the speed setting and setting piston oil pressure over the ball valve. The time delay feature of the device is controlled by the engine speed. When the engine speed is below the fourth throttle position, governor pressure oil must pass through a time delay device before reaching the oil. And then this shows the your low oil pressure switch shutdown device. Alright, your failure piston and the time delay is brought out by the governor oil passing with the intermittent flow of the orifice to the top speed with the control rotating bushing at each revolution of the bushing and slot with the bushing aligned with the oil line with the oil failure position. The amount of the oil discharge from the slot with the regulated with adjusting port sleeve. The amount of the discharge determine the time required to emit the specific amount of the oil to move the accumulator piston through its full travel. The operating oil failure piston when engine speed is above the third throttle position. The speed solenoid bearing on the triangular fulcrum plate with the governor open to the time delay bypass. The bypass is open. The governor oil goes directly to the oil filter piston. Shuts down will occur on the to obtain down to 2 seconds. It will occur in about 2 seconds. Alright, your maintenance setting of the time delay bypass operating the governor at throttle 2 position will normally oil pressure to the governor. Back off several turns, bypass adjusting screw figure 1214 located the triangular plate between the AC and D of the solenoids. Open the lube oil pressure bleed valve and close the lube oil pressure supply valve to drop the oil pressure below zero rapidly as possible. The shutdown plunger should not trip in less than 30 seconds. Turn the bypass, adjusting screw slightly with the repeat steps 1 through 3. Shutdown plunger trip in 2 seconds or less after oil pressure is rapidly dropped to zero. Back out of the bypassing adjusting screw 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. Turn. Repeat step 3 for the low idle and throttle 2 position. Shutdown should not occur with less than 30 seconds. Repeat steps 3 and 4, 3 and 4. Throttle position, shutdown, throttle position must occur within 2 seconds. Setting of the time delay. Operate the governor at idle speed. Open lube oil pressure bleed valve. Close the lube oil pressure supply valve to drop the oil pressure to the zero rapidly if possible. This could cause the shutdown plunger to trip within 50 to 60 seconds. Alright, if the time delay is not within 50 to 60 seconds, adjust the time delay adjustment with the figure 1214 located under the A and C solenoids. Movement of the adjusting of the counterclockwise direction increase the time delay. Alright, your oil filter description. The oil filter figure 1215, you be the governor to protect with the servo bellows assembly screen and orifice stack. The filter is contained in the housing that is mounted on the side plate. Maintenance design of the filter and such for the under normal services of the expected same with the service without cleaning the other attention maintenance may be done at annual inspection of the governor work. However, the sensor assembly bellows operation does not follow the low air pressure changes. Figure 1215 shows the oil filter removal. Closely, the filter should be checked for cleanliness. If required, the filter may be cleaned washing the solvent. Alright, flushing the governor. Governing flush is not recommended. Regular maintenance item is instead, the governor should be disassembled clean if the operation is impaired due to the other foreign materials in the governor. In case the necessity of the governor is suspected in being dirty, it would not be practical to remove the governor from the engine. It may be flushed on the engine as fouled. The engine should be shut down with the drain plug removed from the governor cave. The petcock open. The closed valve of the replace plug with the 2 points of the filtered kerosene. The governor start engine. Use the injector control lever, the varying speed of the engine 4 to 500 RPMs with above 5 minutes. Shut down the engine and drain kerosene from the governor. Repeat this operation several times until the kerosene drain from the governor appears clean. Add 2 pints of recommended oil governor. Repeat with this above procedure. Drain this will remove the kerosene trapped in the governor. Fill the governor with recommended oil. Proper level of starting engine. Adjust the governor compensation as previously described. The oil should then be checked out and oil added as necessary. Alright, governor oil supply. The engine idle speed of the governor oil should be maintained with the proper level in sight glass. At the vent at the top of the sight glass must be open to ensure the correct readings. Governor oil specification listed on the data and page. Alright, governor storage is stored with the governor oil should be drained when the governor has operating to meet the specification. No further treatment is necessary if the governor oil does not meet the recommended specification. Drain and fill with the recommended oil. If possible, the operator of the governor for several minutes, then again drain the oil. The recommended oil should be used when the governor is returned to service. Governor drive assembly. The description: the governor drive assembly figure 1217 is mounted on the front of the engine. Accessory drive cover adjusting the water pumps. The governor is mounted with a housing driving through the 90-degree bevel drive gear drive. The serrated end of the drive shaft is made with the drive plate with the governor drive gear, and the accessory gear drive train lubricating the governor drive bearings is provided with the drill passage in the driving housing. A cover having the removable plug is provided. The housing of the tachometer adapter figure 1216 being inserted with the drive shaft end of the adapter end of the insert with the reamed hole within the end of the governor drive shaft that has a friction fret. Alright, your maintenance. The governor drive assembly normally does not require servicing except at the time of the general engine overhauling reconditioning. At this time, when the condition warrants, the governor drive assembly should be removed. The parts inspected to check with after removal of the governor drive assembly can be easily removed. A mounting dowel with correctly positioned with the governor driving housing accessory drive gear shows the governor drive gear accessory drive cover, the governing drive gear stub shaft. Your governor drive shaft, the tachometer adapter drive shaft, bearing cover, drive gear, the plug driven gear, oil passage, governor mounting studs, and accessory drive cover. After the governor drive assembly has been removed, the disassemble the visually inspect the bushing and the bore of the truss face of the flaking and embedded dirt, the chipping and screwing of the bushings are if the bushings that are chipped or flaked with have a large quantity of embedded dirt should be replaced with a new bushing. Check oil patch of the housing, ensure they're free of the restrictions, spur, specs, bevel, gears, and the neck pitting and the visible wear on load through the face of the neck spurs at any high spots should be sewn on the gear replaced if then necessary to replace the gear. Recommended that both gears are replaced as a set. Check individual parts assembly to ensure that the dimensions are within limited given the service data. And show the service data governor, and this is the material specification. Equipment driver governor does died speed specifications, fuel limiters. Okay, so this was Section 12, the governor for your electric motive division, GM engine maintenance manual 645, Section 12, governor.